Right. Hey guys. So um, I didn't put anything up Friday. I just decided to wait till today, till Monday. Um, I'm going to put these notes up so you can kind of follow along. I'm going to make scans of the book. What I just decided to do, since we should be back a week from tomorrow, in the hybrid. I'm just going to wait until then to get you guys books so you don't have to drive in and make a special trip to the school to get books or anything like that. Um, and I'll just hand them out then. And until then, I'll just make copies. Um, I'll just take scans of the book and put those up in classroom for now. If for some reason we end up being extended full remote longer, then I probably will set up a way for like I'll set up a way for you guys to come in and get the books. Um, But if everything goes as it is now, we'll just wait until then. Okay. All right. So the part that I had you guys read um, last week was the stuff about Easter Island, right? Excuse me. Um, so the little sort of story and version uh, about Easter Island and what occurred on there, right? Um, so in these notes, and a lot of times, um, so again, I'm going to kind of apologize in advance. This class is designed to be more of a discussion based and me to sort of like ask you guys things and get you to think about it. It's a little more difficult to do just through full remote on video lectures. Uh, so I'll do the best I can, and a lot of it's probably going to seem like I'm just sort of rehashing the notes or reading them to you, and I'll try to do as little of that as possible. But uh, so the first part of the notes here, we have lessons from Easter Island, things that we can learn from the example of Easter Island. And these were some of the things that you could have put in the answer for the review question that you had to do for last week as well. We need to use natural resources in a way that we will continue to have access to them. Uh, and the potential exists to overuse critical resources, having severe consequences for human existence. So one of the things about this Easter Island example that people need to be careful about is a lot of times people think about, well, if something happened that long ago and these people weren't that advanced or they weren't that smart or, like, oh, well, now we know a lot more. So we would never do that as a society or as a, the human race. Um, but what you have to realize is you have to think like there were 10 to 20,000 of them living on a very small area. They were very advanced. They had a very advanced society, and they weren't dumb. Like um, they obviously had figured out and created a very advanced society at that point. So this didn't happen to them because of a lack of intelligence. Okay. So that's one trap that we don't want to fall into, is this idea that whenever something bad happened in the past, or we look back and we see examples that, oh, it was just, they just didn't know any better, they were stupid, or it was such a long time ago, like that kind of thing. Um, that's really has nothing to do with what actually happened. Um, so we do have this potential to overuse critical resources. So another lesson along with this is the Earth has a finite or limited amount of resources, and overpopulation and or overuse could cause them to be used faster than they are replaced. So one of the reasons they use Easter Island is because um, it's sort of like a mini example, like a small scale example of the Earth. In Easter Island, because they were so far removed from any other civilization, any other land, any other thing, they were out in the middle of nowhere. They essentially were their own Earth, because at that point in time, like they had no way of really getting um, to any other place for more resources, to for connections with other people. Like they were isolated, um, and they had to essentially live on anything that they could use on that island and in the surrounding ocean area and stuff. I'm not even talking about after they couldn't make boats anymore. Even then, like they at that point in time, there was no like they with the technology and boat wise and stuff, they couldn't get anywhere. They were so far removed from everything else. So, um, and at least in terms of realistic, like um, they it's like not like they could create trade with certain areas or have any kind of consistent um, uh, communication with other areas and civilizations. Okay. Um, so what happened to them is sort of like a small scale model of what could potentially happen on Earth. Okay. And one of the last things is more of a society, a sociological um, lesson concept. When they talked in the book about the essentially the Civil War that started here during the 17th century, the revolt, and they entirely the virtually the entire ruling religious class were killed, and then they like basically anarchy broke out and they splintered into different factions and groups and continued to fight. So um, another lesson is sort of this: when the gap between the haves and the have-nots in a society widens, it creates instability and can have devastating consequences for both the society and the environment. Uh, because you get this huge gap, and those that have resources and things, and they will do almost anything possible to keep a grip on that. They don't want the situation to change because they're doing very well. They've got the resources they want. They're living okay. They're succeeding. They don't want that situation to change, so they will fight um, and try to keep the situation the same. Those that don't have or have significantly less um, start to feel oppressed and start to feel uh, like the unjustness and the unfairness in that inequality. And because they are struggling to have the resources they need to survive and thrive, they are much more willing then to fight and to uh, really push the boundary to change the status quo. And that's where and when that gap keeps widening, that inequality creates even more, a bigger instability and more and larger rifts, and it can cause a society to fracture. Okay? And so it's very interesting because we're seeing some of that currently, and not just in the United States. I'm not talking like necessarily even politically. I'm talking like economically around the world. We're seeing that. Like you've probably seen some of the numbers even recently about the um, the wealthiest, like for lack of a better term, like the 1% or whatever. Like how much money they've actually made over the last 2 years in the pandemic. Like how much their wealth has grown, while like you know middle, lower, and lower economic groups have suffered and are struggling. So as that economic disparity and that gap and the haves and the haves not widens, it creates even more tension and strife. So that's another lesson that can be learned from Easter Island. Okay, so all right, moving on. So sustainability. Now, actually, I'm going to come back a little bit to that. I'm going to go first to, and we don't. There's not. This isn't really in the notes, but I do want to talk about it a little bit in your book, and you'll have the scans for your book here. But um, some they talk about the global environmental uh, picture. Now, one thing I'm going to tell you guys right off the bat is these books were published back in, I believe, 2006. So a lot of the data is from 2003, 2004, 2005ish. Like you can see here, this data is from 2004. So we just have to keep that in mind that this data, a lot of the data from this book is is 15 to 20 years old. And now some of the stuff in the notes I try to update. Like I've updated, it's not in these notes, but in a different set. Like I've updated like population numbers and stuff like that. But just keep that in mind from the book. So it's kind of interesting though, especially for this, talking about the population growth, because you can see in this chart, the solid line is the population growth, and then the dotted line is the projected. So it becomes really interesting when we're talking about the projected from 15, 20 years ago. They've got us projected right in here, right around, let's see, halfway between 2012 and 2027. So that would be what is that difference? 15 years. So half of that is 7.5. So you're talking right around 19 and a half. So right around 2020 is about 7.5 billion. And we are right around there. That's right around, I think world population right now is hovering somewhere around I want to say 7.4 to 7.6. So that's like right in that range. So it's interesting to see how the projection is playing out. So they talk at the beginning here about the global environmental picture. It says four global trends are of particular concern. 1, population growth and economic development. 2, decline of vital life support ecosystems. 3, global atmospheric changes. And 4, loss of biodiversity. Each of these issues is explored in greater depth in later chapters. So they're talking about sort of like the state of the planet and our interactions with it. And they've sort of identified these 4 main areas of things of concern, or things that we should be paying attention to and managing, both for the good of the planet, but also for the good of our race and our future, and us being successful in continuing our future, and trying to think of like how like advancing as a civilization successfully and a global society. Okay, so we talk about population growth. They estimate by 2050. You're showing here at 2050, they're estimating a little like around 9 billion people on the planet. So saying that's like an additional 2.5 billion people that will have to be fed, clothed, housed, and hopefully have gainful employment. That means like being able to work and have a job to support themselves. And it talks about where the increase in population will occur the most. Developing countries, which most developing countries are very poor and don't have infrastructure to support that. Right? So population growth and economic development is a very sort of real concern. Okay. So the decline of ecosystems. And again, we'll talk more about this a little later. But essentially, like, remember, the ecosystems, a lot of times people, when they think about like ecosystems and wildlife and stuff and whatever, and they think about like, tree huggers and all, people like saying like, oh, you can't do anything, you got to save all the wildlife, don't do anything, don't harm it, don't touch it, don't do it. Like, that's not really the goal. The idea of responsible development and ecosystem management and stuff is to be able to sort of use it, but use it in a responsible way where we don't destroy it and we maintain our ability to use it in the future. We get everything we need, even really, from our ecosystems. Fresh water, our food, all of the materials that we use for clothing and for development and building, and at some point somehow comes, whether it's metals from mining or whether it's trees for lumber, or growing things like cotton and stuff for clothes. Like all of these things come from the environment. Even things like plastic, which you could say is like man-made, that the original base materials come from the environment, petroleum and oil products, stuff like that. So the stuff that we need to survive and thrive as a species all comes from our environment, and therefore we have a vested interest in managing that and making sure it we're able to maintain that so we can continue to use it. So I'm not going to read through all of this. You guys can kind of check through it. The next section is the global atmospheric changes on page 7. Again, this is more sort of what you guys know. You're probably more aware of this. It's been, in the news sort of before the pandemic and things like that even. And, global warming / it's really more accurately referred to as climate change, because it affects different areas of our globe differently. But climate change and that's a very real thing, and especially something that your generation is going to have to deal with as you guys grow up. It's going to become more and more of an issue, and it's going to occur faster and faster, and become have a bigger and bigger impact on us. So okay, so we'll talk about the loss of biodiversity. I'm going to actually put off until a little bit later, that we'll discuss this a little bit differently in this chapter. So that's basically it for the 1-1. Like I said, sustainability, we're going to talk about a little bit actually in the next section. I'm going to push this off until then, which I'll be doing a video lecture tomorrow. So we'll push this little part of this off until then, and we'll talk about that again tomorrow. Okay? All right. I will see you later, guys. Have a good one.